Welcome back to PV Online, and we're going to take a look at significant digits or figures. You'll hear both of those terms used often. There are 4 rules that are going to determine whether or not a number is going to count, whether it's going to be significant to us. And there are 4 rules that you have to be familiar with. The first is pretty straightforward. As soon as you have a number that is not a 0, they always count. Okay, zeros are going to be the only thing that give us problems. So you'll see that this number right here, I've got 4,895.2. It's got 5 significant figures. All of the digits in that number have meaning. Okay, now we go into the zeros. The zeros are the ones that cause us a little bit of difficulty. And you'll notice that anytime I have a 0 in front of the number, in front of the non-zeros, they're not going to count. We call these guys right here, we call these guys our placeholders. And basically all it's doing is it's telling us how small the number is. So all these zeros right here, those are just telling us that we have a very small number and we're going to start measuring down, way down here. So in this case, I've got 4 significant figures because the 5s and the 4s are significant. They're the non-zeros. All right, rule number 3. I've got a 0 after the decimal point and after a number. So I'm to the right of the decimal and I'm to the right of a non-zero. So now in this case, this guy right here is not significant. He doesn't count because he's just telling us this is a small number. This one over here, this one to the right of the non-zero, to the right of the decimal point, does count. Or else why would we bother writing it down? If it didn't have any meaning, it's not going to help further us other than to realize that, okay, it's exactly 0.0880. That 0 matters. Now compare that to this next number, and these 2 zeros don't count because, again, it's behaving like a number 2. It's a placeholder, and it's simply telling us that it's a big number. So if you have lots and lots of zeros out here, those are not going to be significant. They are not going to do anything but tell us the magnitude of the number. And then last but not least, we have anytime you have a 0 between 2 non-zeros or between 2 digits, they count. So this one counts because it's in between 2 non-zeros, but this one doesn't count because it's to the right of a non-zero, but still to the left of a decimal. Now these, what do we call these right here when it's just telling us it's a small number? We call those placeholders. They are not going to be significant when we're counting on significant figures. These 2 do matter. They're going to be significant because they're in between 2 non-zeros. Now real quick, when I marked off that 0, that didn't become 305. It just meant that it was not significant. That's all that I meant there. All right, now let's go ahead and see if we can practice some examples. All right, so I've got these examples over here. And what I did was I just kind of put in the rules again and see if you can identify which rule is going to dictate whether or not all of those numbers are significant. Now we know both 5s are going to count because all numbers 1 through 9 count. So that's rule number 1. But now we got the 0. The 0 is always going to be the one that's the problem. Now this 0 is in between 2 non-zeros. And according to rule number 4, zeros between significant digits count, which means then that for 5.05, there are 3 significant figures. Now let's take a look at the 1200. We know the 1 and the 2 count due to rule 1, but we've got these 2 zeros. And these 2 zeros are to the left of a decimal, but to the right of a digit. So those 2 are not significant. All they are placeholders. It's simply telling us how large the number is. This one is going to have 2 significant figures. Ooh, look at this guy. We got all kinds of stuff going on here. So we know that this is going to matter. We know that this is going to matter because they're both non-zeros. That 0 is in between 2 non-zeros. So which rule is that? 1, 2, 3, or 4? And hopefully you see that it's rule number 4, so that one is going to count. So he's a significant figure. What about this 0 far over here to the right? It's to the right of a decimal, it's to the right of a non-zero, and you'll see that number 3, it's zeros after decimal point and a number count. So this one's going to count. But then we've got this, and all it's doing is it's a placeholder. It's telling me how large the number is. Zeros in front never count. That means I have 4 significant figures. All right, take a look at the next one. What do you think? How many significant figures are in this? Now notice what happened here. This was in front of a non-zero. It didn't count. These are not going to count, but the 5 will because it's a number. So that's 1 significant figure. What about this guy? All right, we know the 5 counts, but will the 0 count? And this 0 is going to behave just like this 0 up here. It is just a placeholder. I'm only going to have 1 significant figure. But now we get these guys, and you'll see that these 3 are to the right of a decimal, or these 2 at least are, but it's continuing from the 5, and it's to the right of the digit. And so all of those are going to count, which is going to give us 4 significant figures. And then the last one, let's end with an easy one. And how many significant figures do we have there? Well, I have all of them are non-zeros, all of them count. I'm going to have 5 significant figures. All right, so now let's take a look at the rounding. Oh, instead, how about if we first talk about an exact number? Oh, look at this. Okay, now do you see what happened here? You'll see that we have a yellow text. And with this yellow text, we can't read a thing. And this is a nice example because you have to keep that in mind when you're doing problems in our text boxes in your classwork. And if you choose a font color, which is really cool, but if I can't read it, that's not good. So you want to make sure that you pick a color that's easily that we can easily read. Okay, now there are going to be some things that are called an exact number. An exact number is going to be one where we don't use significant figures. It's not going to be counted when we're doing our calculation. An exact number, if you take a look at these examples, are kind of nice. There are 14 people. Okay, that's an exact number. We're not going to have a quarter of a person. There are, if you have 5 iPods or 5 cups of coffee, you've got exactly 5. Now, what's not going to be exact is when you're measuring things like pounds, inches, ounces, feet, seconds. That's not going to be exact. So that's where significant figures become very important to us. So you'll notice that what happens with exact numbers is we're not going to worry about significant figures. They're not going to apply with exact numbers. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about real quick is rounding, how we're going to round. And rounding, if it's less than 5, you don't round up. If it's greater than 5, you round up. Don't change the magnitude of the number, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a second. All right, so we've got these 3 examples, and I'm going to ask you to round these numbers off to 3 significant figures. So we're going to round them. So I really want my answer to end up with, let me get 3 significant figures, which is going to leave me with this, whoops, 1, 8, and 3. My screen keeps moving. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get that to not move. There we go. So I want to end up with 3 significant figures, which means I need to look at what's happening with this 7. And since my 7 is greater than 5, when I write my answer is going to be 1.8, and I'm going to round up, 1.84. All right, so now let's take a look at the next one. We have $7,162.32, but I want you to round it to 3 significant figures. So I'm going to leave the 7, 1, and so the 6 is going to be the one that's a question to us. So you need to look at the number to the right of it. And since 2 is less than 5, what will I do with the 6? Now, I'm going to leave it as 6. But this is what we were talking about not changing the magnitude of the number. I still have $7,000. Don't change it to 716 so that you have 3 significant figures. But what we'll do is where I had 7,106, instead of putting this 2 there, I'm going to put a 0. Because since that 0 is to the right of a non-zero, that's no longer going to be significant. This number has 3 significant figures in it. And if we want to be complete, we can put in our 00 for our dollars. All right, and take a moment and see if you can do number 3 on your own. We want 3 significant figures. That means you need to realize that these 3 zeros, do they matter or do they not? And they don't matter, and we call those placeholders. So the correct answer would be 0.00131. And there you go, it's an introduction to significant figures. See you next time.